Now.
Now? Just tell me what to do. I've been gone. And I am so happy to be home. Yay. And happy to be back here in my spiritual home. It feels pretty special. So let us begin this time of celebration together by taking a deep breath, letting it all out. Maybe closing our eyes and just being in the presence, basking in the love that fills this room, basking in the celebration of light that is this beautiful spring day with its rain-washed air and its flowers blooming. And let us just pause and give thanks. Let us give thanks for the phenomena of the divine as it expresses all around us and as it expresses through each and every one of us and connects us to each other and to spirit and to the world at large. We know we are in the oneness. We celebrate that. We know it's peace. We know it's connection. We know it's love. And so for that and for all the blessings of this life, we give thanks. And together we say, and so it is. So it is. So nice to be here. So, there is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. I think R.L. recognizes that. So says Shakespeare's Hamlet, as he famously contemplates both his physical circumstances and the ruminations of his own mind. What he is telling himself, and the rest of us, the audience, is that it's not so much what happens to us, but how we think about what happens to us that creates our lived experience. He says we cast both the light and the shadow in our world with the quality of our thoughts. Now, we all have the potential to experience a fully luminous world, should we so choose. The shortest path to that perspective is to choose to see the presence of the divine in all we encounter, including within ourselves. We also have the potential to create a world shrouded in darkness, should we choose to deny that light and that presence, both within us and all around us. We are inherently of the light, and we are the creator of our own shadows. When I think of the deepest shadows cast by our thoughts, I imagine walking through a forest, thick with dense and towering trees so impenetrable that even the forest floor is cloaked in gloom. In these dark woods, each tree is a thought that says, God cannot be here, either not within me because I am not sufficiently lovable, capable, or worthy, or not within that which I see because I am heartsick or angry or frightened by what I see. Now, hopefully, most of us don't live our everyday in such a place where all light is obstructed by such contracting thoughts, though most of us have been there at one time or another. Our journey in such times and at all times is just to keep walking, moving in the direction of whatever faint glimmer of light we can see, toward that place where the forest of our negating thoughts becomes less dense, where our feet can find open space and our eyes a bit of sky. Eventually, if we keep walking toward the light, that light that is always present and available to us, there will be an opening, a glade where the sun shines fully and we can feel it warming us to our core, where we know we are loved and of the light. Once there, the most blessed and aware among us may stay there forever, in perfect alignment to that light and with no need to venture further into the shadows cast by limiting beliefs. But most of us will eventually plunge once again into the forest of our own contracted thinking, though perhaps this time into a place with fewer trees, with a mix of light and shadow, where the path before us is more readily apparent and the sunlit glades more frequently encountered. Eventually, I like to think that at some point we all arrive at the place where each shadow-casting thought that arises is readily recognizable for what it is, an insubstantial and passing phenomenon, just an idea and nothing more, and with no capacity to cast a shadow. So, it's so good to be back, yay. And now we get to read our affirmation together, which is inside in our insert. Looks like this. And it says affirmation for May. It's right beneath the graphic. Everybody got it? Okay, let's do it together. I am perfect, whole, and complete as I accept both the light and the shadow of my being. Now, it says here that it's special music, but I already got, waylaid by believing what I was reading, so I'll leave it to R.L. to tell us what we're doing next.
See, you go away and things change. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, R.L.
Thought of the day. As we were singing You Are Not Alone this morning, I was reminded that I had seen a memory that popped up for someone on Facebook this week with a picture of just this page. And it was from a memorial celebration for someone in our community that happened, golly, maybe 8 or 9 years ago. I am horrible. I didn't look at the date. But I was reminded how those things that are in our lives become woven into memories. For somebody who's singing this for the first time this morning, maybe the memory is, the first time I went to Light on the Mountains, we sang this song. For someone else who was at that memorial gathering celebrating a life, it's connected to that life. And to others, and other people in other cities and other congregations, other gatherings have sung that song for other reasons, of celebration, of memory, of shadow. It's a great song to think about sitting in the shadow, knowing that you are not alone. It's a great thought in the light, sitting there thinking, I'm not alone. It reminds me of both how absolutely important everything is and how nothing is really very important at all. It just is. We just are. And sometimes we bump into each other. Sometimes we bump into each other hard. And we have to figure out how to say those I'm sorry words or oops, I made a mistake. And we do, we make mistakes, right? I make mistakes. There we go. Nancy Cannett raised her hand right away. I don't know what that means. But she's just being honest. But along the way in those mistakes that we make, I think we also do an awful lot of good. And if we stopped doing it all, we could probably avoid some mistakes, but we'd miss all the good. You know? If the year that my mother double salted the gravy had been the last year she made gravy, that would have been sad. Though I think she considered never making gravy again. It seemed important. Now I digress. Morning, John.
Good morning, R.L. Good morning, Max. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone at home. Here's the weird thing about the last few years. I was gonna. One weird thing about the last few years. No, well, I have like multiple tracks of conversation going on in my head right now. I'm trying to see which one wins out. No, as I'm going to talk a bit about our leadership retreat we had a couple weeks ago. And part of it is, well, where are we now, in a sense? Pre-pandemic, we had 2/3 of our attendance in person and 1/3 online, and now that has flipped. And so 2/3 of you are at home in your scuffy slippers and all that, and the other third is here. So part of this is like a spoiler alert. So it's not like, well, how do we change that? It's like, that's what's showing up now, so what do we do? So that's just a little precursor. So it's just so interesting that I with just that little fact of talking to some of my colleagues, well, how do we get it to switch back? It's like, that's probably not our job, but to make people welcome and connected regardless of how they choose to show up. That's kind of the lesson. And don't we do that a lot when we're trying to force something to happen? It's like, it's not this way anymore, so I have to make it happen again. We're just like, there's streets flooded again with all this rain. It's like, how do I make the flood stop? Well, probably you don't. You just get out of the way is probably the better way to look at it. But anyways, that's spoiler alert. First, I want to welcome Sara coming back. I want to welcome both Candace and Ted back. Anyone else back yet? A couple of you you'll be coming back soon. And thank you to Karen look how amazing the front yard looked. Just tell her hey. I said, even like 3 weeks ago, we were really quite cranky about this whole weather thing, weren't we? And I even mentioned to Sarah when they came back, it's kind of like suddenly in The Wizard of Oz when Dorothy goes into Munchkin's Land into Technicolor. Suddenly that's how it is now. It's like, leave the tornado behind. So anyway, we're going to talk a bit about our leadership retreat, not because we're going to rehash what happened, but what it brings up for the collective as a community. And it was a Friday evening, and it was much of Saturday, and I guess you could say that it was a process of prayer. And first, before I talk about that, let's talk about prayer a little bit. First of all, prayer is one of those words that depending on how you were raised, you may have gone there. And you may have gone to the religion of your upbringing, and that may have been a positive or a not positive association. So it's funny how all those little, religious words kind of like get you right here. It's like, like I said, I always brings me back to being in Sister Mary Godzilla's class and like what they told you about it, And so wait, no, I don't believe that anymore. So what is prayer in a sense? First of all, it is not putting in a request form to somewhere out there. And it's actually comforting to think that it's that way, because I like to think I could just like Amazon.com. I can go and find what I want. I press send, and it says it will be here by a particular date. I would love prayer to be like that. I really would. It would be so convenient. But it's not. So prayer, in a sense, is raising our consciousness and vibration to be open to receive a different result than you're receiving now. So just think about that. So as prayer only changes you, so it is raising your consciousness and vibration to receive something that you had not been open to receiving previously. So just kind of let that set in. It's like, gee, I really just wanted to go to Amazon.com. But actually, this works out better in the long run than Amazon.com. And so you think, well, okay, then can I still get all the stuff I want? Well, kind of. But you have to look at it a little bit differently. So one way that I've been looking at it, a couple ways a little bit differently lately. So first of all, what is the most successful thing to pray for? There's a couple things. The most successful thing to pray for is to pray for guidance and inspiration on how to take your next steps forward. Not as opposed to, on the human level, when we are in a dilemma, and kind of our smaller selves, our kind of anxiety selves, that we will usually very quickly in our dilemma come to a conclusion what we would think would solve that dilemma, don't we? I mean, get floods. What do I do? Call the plumber. If you do have a flood, do call the plumber, then pray. But don't we do that? We have a dilemma, and very quickly we will come to what we think will solve that dilemma. We all do that, don't we? And like we say, don't send that email too quickly. Sit on this for a little while. That may or may not be a good route to go. The most successful prayer is to open our hearts and minds, and like with our retreat, rather than saying this is what we want, it's within the divine saying, well, what do you think? A lot of my opinions haven't worked out, so let's try something else here. The power that created the universe, maybe you have a better idea than I do. So that is a very successful route to go to. But it's a little scary too, because on our smaller self, personality cells, when we come up with what we think is a solution, that gives us something to like grasp on. And in ways sometimes that don't work out all that well. So we think, oh, if this thing shows up, it'll only be better. But when you're on the level of anxiety and grasping, even if that thing shows up, it's still like, well, I guess it wasn't that after all, was it? So there's another thing I have to grasp onto to solve my dilemma here. But to open yourselves up to saying, admitting, on a human level, I'm not too clear here. So in a sense, spirit, divine, universe, what do you think? And another way I had this put that I think is really interesting, it's in a sense, not to pray for guidance so much, but to pray to realize that guidance has been here all along, and we have just not allowed ourselves to see it. So the prayer is not for guidance, but to be aware of and see the guidance that have been there all along. Very similar, I read an article this week about the lenses in our eyes, that how we see color with our eyes. But this article pointed out there are so many levels of light that we can't see just because of how our eyes are formed. And it said if there was some magical thing to give you an upgrade, you would see lots of things that you're not seeing now. The same with praying to see guidance. It is lurking and floating around all the time. And we get so stuck on where we are that we may not see it, or it frightens us a little bit that, well, no, that's a little too scary to go over there, that we stay with the tried and true, which has not really worked to this point. So even when you go to the process of prayer, it's not like, gee, I hope something happens. It's like, this amazing stuff is here already, and how can I elevate my consciousness to recognize that it is here already, and that I just need to get on board? And you think, well, if I can do that, will everything just be solved instantly? Not so much, because this is how this works too. Like I say, there's the good news and bad news, at least on the human level. So when you make an affirmation or a statement with all your belief, with a higher consciousness that something exists, on the level of spirit, it exists 100%. Instantaneous manifestation. But we are not on the level in the physical of spontaneous manifestation. We are on the level of what I call process. If you have these lovely flowers out there, they started with a seed or a bulb. You absolutely knew when they were put in the ground that in a process they would arise and come up as a flower. But in that moment that they were a seed or the bulb, you didn't see that. Because on the physical earth, we live in the realm of process. So part of having faith in our guidance being available is to believe that it is there, know that it is there, and that there is a process that I will start to witness and seeing it before me. And that's frustrating. Sometimes the process is very quick, sometimes not so much. There are some times that we have waited for years for something, and that doesn't mean that there was something wrong with you or your process. It was basically, the answer wasn't no, it was just not yet. Things aren't aligned, things aren't ready. The other people that need to be involved in this aren't there yet. And so you stay in this process of absolute trust and knowing that guidance is here. And what is so interesting with this is that as you start to see it happen finally, it's pretty miraculous. At least it seems to be that miraculous. So it's a process. Just because you don't see it today doesn't mean that it's not fully available and exists on the level of spirit. So to really look at it that. So you're not waiting for someone to decide on whether to give it to you. You are waiting for the right level of consciousness for it to be the right time for you. And also that guidance, things will be nuanced and it'll change a little bit. It's like to really be open where you get that, that's the thing that I need to do. And of course, the other thing is, it shows up on, as I say, the universe works on a need-to-know basis. It's often not going to show up all at the same time. In my reading this week, the writer was just kind of chuckling at all us humans, saying, you're the type of people that when you read a book, you want to read the last few pages so you can know how it ends. We want the result. Like I had a friend a few months ago. I don't know what he was watching on Netflix. It was like a 10 episode sort of thing, and I guess it was very stressful. I don't know if it was spies or aliens or something like, it's going to happen. He was just like, he was in such anxiety. He said he had to look up the 10th and final episode on the internet to get a synopsis just to make sure it was all going to turn out okay. And so that he could watch all the mayhem, all the other episodes, and know, okay, no, it all turns out in the end. And on a human level, we want to do that. If we want to look ahead, and like I can really have a lot of faith if I can just cheat and look at the back of the book here and know that it's going to turn out okay. So part of this prayer for guidance to see it is to trust that it will always turn out okay on some level. Maybe not your preferred choice as a human being, but it will turn out perfectly in a larger sense. Other thing here, before we talk about our visioning on our retreat, of what is your go-to best prayers. So guidance is first. Second, I've created this page, and some of you have seen it. There is a second page of spiritual principles. So this is how prayer works now. So if you came to me in my office as John, a catastrophe has befallen our house. It's like, well, okay. So here's a little secret, like what happens in my office. So I, in my head, have this list. And you're going to tell me your tale of woe. And I'm going to figure out, with your input, which one of these is something that you are seeking. We're not going to talk about your car loan, or can you find a place to live. I mean, those things are important. But I'm going to go through the Rolodex of my brain and on here and think that maybe they are looking for purpose or reconciliation or grace or discernment. And as you are heartfully telling me what is happening with you, I might say something like this. It's hard for me to understand what you're going through now, but in our prayer today, if you could have a sense of wholeness and freedom come out of the situation, would it matter how it showed up? Would those two qualities make you really feel like your prayer was answered again, regardless of how it happened? If that happened, would you feel fulfilled? And if the answer is yes, because sometimes we do a couple hit and misses, but once we get to it, even the person who is in my office telling me their story, they've shifted to a different state of consciousness. They realize that, yes, this is a troublesome thing, but it's raised the bar on what they know will help heal and bring themselves to wholeness in the situation. Does that kind of make some sense? It gets you out of just the problem level. And again, we're on the level of process. We have to solve our problems. They don't go away on their own. But when I say elevating to consciousness or your vibration, it's on the level of this page here. What is it that I'm really seeking and need to have in my life or the life of my family right now? And the homework I send people home with is, again, not that you deny your problems. I mean, we have things that need to happen. You need to make some phone calls. You need to go to Costco. You need to do whatever you need to do to get the thing going. But to have first and foremost, whatever from this page that you have come to know you are inviting into your life, to always have that at the top of the list. Especially if we're humans. We all go into, oh my God, this thing is terrible, whatever. Let's go. But the first thing on my list is forgiveness. The first thing on my list is kindness. One of these things, or multiple of these things, has to be the first on your list as you go to prayer. So prayer is not about solving problems. It is about inviting a higher consciousness that will lead you to a way to see through your problems. Does that make sense a little bit? So let's shift a little bit. So to this little paper. And we're not going into workshop mode. I'm not going to bring you to how to fill these out, but I'm going to invite you to either today sometime or during the week and then send these back. So this is the process we went to. First of all, hasn't the last few years just been kind of interesting? Didn't things happen that you didn't think were going to happen? Didn't, like in 2019, like I say here, it's like, boy, all our goals had been fulfilled. And then suddenly they weren't anymore? Like, who makes this stuff up in the universe? What sick little person says, yeah, just when you think it's going great, we're going to throw this at you. Like, oh, you haven't had a pandemic in centuries. Let's try this just for fun. Boy, it was fun. But it certainly has been a platform for amazing learning and social change. And as we all have come out of it more or less, it's time to think, what have we learned? And what is our direction now with what we have learned? And then also getting back to what prayers are most effective, how can we then let go of all this and get to page 2 over here? So again, I want you to have this by your TV. So when you start watching the news and your favorite villain in politics comes up, it could be anyone, I don't care if it's red or blue, we all have him, go, oh, this is what Reverend John told me about. I need to go to this page. I mean, really, we shouldn't be oblivious to the news, but don't get sucked in. It's like, oh, what do we need here? I'm going to start praying for this here, and like, yeah, I'm still going to listen to so-and-so, but this is what we need. So that is one of the big lessons of this group experience that we had, is that this is what we need as a way to go to the real solutions in the physical world. So, this is one of the first things that we did. In fact, when we approach a leadership retreat, coming up with a direction, here's the worst way to facilitate a leadership retreat. And you've probably been to something like this. The facilitator will open, let's list all our problems and how things have gone so badly. Don't you feel, after a half an hour of that, won't you feel uplifted? Won't you feel like maybe, gee, I'm hoping they're serving alcohol with lunch? I mean, even if you haven't drank in years, like, oh, I don't know if I can make it past this one. The first thing in any sort of visioning, spiritual brainstorming, leadership retreat is to first admit how amazing things are on a certain level and ask yourselves or reflect, who are we at our best? Meaning, we've gotten out of some pretty difficult things over the years. So what are those qualities? How did we utilize them? How did we use these to rise above what appeared to be problems? So the first step is it's a little patting on the back. How have we, in difficult moments, the last few years, utilized page 2 here to rise above it? And we have. It's been frustrating, and we've been kind of at each other at different times. But we did it anyway. So that's the first thing. And with that, and I really love you to spend a little time on this week, the first little box here, it says, many of us have had a welcome home moment where we realized that Light on the Mountains was our spiritual home. Did you have a similar experience? And if so, would you be willing to briefly share this with us? We're not going to do this now, but I want you to think on this a bit. So can you imagine, first you're going, okay, this leadership retreat. There's 15 of us. Imagine after 15 people talking about how they had a welcome home experience, can you imagine energetically how the room would feel? Even if we just went around and said, what was one of the most inspirational moments of your life? By the time we got to the end here, we'd be like, whew, this is amazing. But and bringing that to Light on the Mountains, when did you just have this feeling that you were home, in a sense? And you may have had multiple ones. And just start thinking about it. And my invitation would be even for you to share it with one other person today as we're having coffee and donuts or whatever we have lurking back there. Share it with something. It's energetically uplifting to share that. I shared my first experience with Light of the Mountains with the group of 15. Of course, I was being considered to be hired, which is a completely different experience. The first person I met was Sarah. She met me at the airport. She took me to lunch first, and just talking about it, and she says, well, I've got to kind of tell you the stuff we didn't tell you a little bit. We do have some challenges and all that sort of thing, but it's great. And it was an amazing weekend on many levels. And I remember, so Sunday night it's over, taking an early plane next Monday morning. I'm staying at the Grabowski's home. For most of you know, it's a very large place. They weren't home. I had never met them, so I'm rambling around in this large home during the winter. Me from Southern California, winter. Snow? I've heard about snow. It's out there. And I just, as I was going to sleep that night, just practically being in tears, like, I don't want to go home because I'm home already. So that was it for me. And we all have a similar experience or you wouldn't be here. So to think about that, what invested you on a level of spirit with us? And so we started from there. And it did admit, so again, what are our challenges and things that we have? And it's just the challenges of life. We're in a pretty good position in many ways. We really are, and a lot to be grateful for. And basically my challenge is just trying to figure out what we're supposed to be doing with this new mix of how things are. That's really it. But there's no problems. It's like, oh, the problems. There's no problems. There's things to look at that need to shift a little bit. And it really mirrored, in a sense, in my blog, I cited a quote from the book of Thomas, which is a gospel that is not in the Bible. It's part of what you know as the Dead Sea Scrolls. And what I love about the book of Thomas is that it's not a narrative, meaning if you're familiar with the Gospels in the Bible, there's a narrative. It starts with a birth, goes to a death. The book of Thomas is a sayings book, meaning just sayings, like Rumi, a list of sayings. And the one that I wrote about, and I've talked about it before, but it just seemed to be important to revisit this week. It says, seek and you will find. In other words, guidance is always there. Once you find, you will be troubled. But once you are troubled, you will be in awe. And once you are in awe, you will be master of all that there is. Doesn't that sound like it's all over the place? So seek and you will find. Know that what you're seeking exists. It is there. It's right there in front of you, and you will find it. But it's interesting. It says, and once you find it, it will be troubled. You will be troubled. And why would you be troubled? Because on some level, it is so amazing and magnificent that you can't even see how it's going to happen. That's often what it is. So when you truly have a prayer of guidance answered, it's not going to guide you to do how you did life 5 years ago. It's going to upsell you a little bit. It's going to say, well, what you're doing is okay, but what if you added this? And that's troubling. I was hoping just to do this like I did it before because I know how. True guidance is saying, no, we're just going to mix it up a little bit. We're just going to add a little bit more, just enough so you'll just feel a little jittery, but jittery meaning is growth. It's raising your consciousness to say there is something larger that is available to me. So that's what trouble is. It's not like, it's like any time in your life when you knew that it was time to step up in a different way. And wasn't it both exhilarating and frightening at the same time? It's like, I'm going to do that. That's being troubled in a sense. Then it says you will be in awe. Awe is this amazing thing because when you get on board with it, the synchronicities of life just have a way of showing up. Like I said, there's no cheating to look in the back of the chapter. You don't need to because you start seeing as you need to the answers along the way. One analogy I've been using a lot in the last couple of years, it's like getting on the escalator. I'm just on the escalator. I had to consciously get on it, but isn't it amazing how it just seems to be magically taking me to someplace else? That's what the sense of awe is. And then lastly, and you will be a master of all, which doesn't mean a human control. It just means if you allow yourself to be fully in faith in the moment, you don't worry. Things happen as they need to happen. Well, that's what that's about. So the way that this relates to it, and as you look this over later on, think about your welcome home moment. And you may have had multiple. The second, what spiritual qualities would you like to experience through activities at Light in the Mountains? So again, we're not just about filling the calendar. What is the depth of experience you would like to have here? Like I said, the barbecue is never about the cheeseburger. It's about what happens when we come together. So to look at that level. Because the main thing that came out of our leadership retreat was the desire for deeper connections, now that we've kind of come out of this Twilight Zone-y kind of an existence. And connections whether you are here in person, or connections whether you are at home, or if you're one of the many people that do both. So how do we deepen in our connections in the same room? How do we deepen in our connections if you're at home, and especially if you're living at a couple states over, and how do I connect with those people in a more meaningful way? Because that's really the thing now. Zoom is not going away. It is, it is not going away. Of course, we were live streaming for years before this all happened, but it's not going away, and it's not this incidental thing that we think, oh, well, that thing. It's a thing. We're still going to be doing it. So how do we connect at a deeper level? How do we get more of page 2 from our connections on the things that we do? And then the last thing says, what gifts do you have to offer? You may give us more details by checking, oh, that wasn't it. So anyways, there's some suggestions here. So just to think that, so again, this is not about filling our calendar. So what gift do you have to give? And it may show up as helping Karen with some weeds out front. It may show up that you want to give a cooking class. It may show up that you have a workshop you used to give, but you'd like to dust it off and upgrade it a little bit. And again, it's not about just doing things. It's about, so when you're considering any of this, rather than thinking, how can I volunteer? It's saying, how can I help the process of deeper connections in my community? That's like a page 2 thing. So if you don't remember anything else today, anything that you go this week, think, how do I get it to page 2? We get stuck on page 1. How do we get it to page 2? So anything that we're talking about connections and things that you may have to offer, it's about page 2. It's about the connection. It's not about the cooking class. It's not about the cheeseburger at the barbecue. It's about how do we meaningful connect, and especially now I think people are longing for it, especially after the experience that we've had the last couple years. People are longing for more meaningful connections, whether it's in person or online or a combination of the two. And to let that be your prayer for the community right now, in our guidance, I mean, these are suggestions of things that we can do, but in your guidance, in your prayer for your community of Light in the Mountains, the guidance is, how can we invite and create a deeper level of connection? I mean, that's really it in a nutshell. And, rather than getting obsessed, oh, a class or this, it's like, how do I deepen in connection? Living by that could just completely change how you show up at coffee hour after our Sunday service. Remember when we started having services back in person again, we practically had to chase people down in the parking lots like, you can actually stay for coffee. It's like, no, I got it. So to just have that as your guiding thought, how do I help facilitate deeper connections? So my invitation to all of you, and for those at home, if you are on our email list, and this week's email had all this information, my invitation and desire would be that you would prayerfully spend some time with us this week. Again, it's not just finding stuff to do. We got plenty of stuff to do. But we need more page 2. So in synopsis of our leadership retreat, basically was dedicating to page 2 on the level of connection. How are we going to do that? It takes us all. It really takes us all. And if you want extra credit or extra God points, how can you also do that in your life that is also a bit separate from your Light in the Mountains experience? how can you take what we're talking about here and have a deeper level of connection in your families, in your jobs, in your community? Kind of all comes together, doesn't it? So I'm just going to leave you with that. Again, my invitation is to fill this out sometime this week and bring it back in or email it. And we're going to see where we're going to go from there. So let's just take this within. Let's just inwardly just say yes. Yes up front to the universe. I don't know what you have in mind, but I'm saying yes anyway. This yes is an acknowledgement that there is a deeper connection and a higher consciousness, an escalator that we are all on, and we say yes to that. We let go of any ideas of how it needs to be, should be, or has to be, and we embrace the larger idea that Spirit knows, the universe knows, and we get on board, and we say yes. We give up the need to look at the last chapter. We give up the need to look on the synopsis for Netflix. We know it's all going to turn out perfectly, amazingly, on all levels. And we are first in line to say, here I am. So we just live in that energy and that consciousness of yes. And in this yes, we give thanks, we express our gratitude to just be here, to just be present, to just be a vessel of Spirit in our lives and the lives of others. And as we give gratitude to this, we let it go. We release it. We take away any attachment to how it looks, and we just say, go with it, and say yes. And so it is.